William Blackstone is virtually unknown to most people in both the Jewish and Christian communities. Yet, Blackstone's influence on both communities has been and continues to be significant. In the 1950s, a woman named Anita Liebesen recognized the importance of Blackstone's contributions, especially in regards to modern-day Zionism. At the New York City Zionist Conference of 1958, Miss Liebesen sought to bring the contributions of Blackstone to light. In his honor, it was decided at the conference that a forest in the Judean hills should be planted, and it should be named the Blackstone Forest. The monies were raised, the plans moved along. The forest was planted in 1961 and funded by both the Christian and Jewish communities through the Jewish National Fund. Unfortunately, just like the memory of Blackstone, the location of that forest has since been forgotten. Today, on the Tov Podcast, we'll explore Blackstone's life, the setting into which he was born, and we'll take a look at some of his contributions to the Christian and Jewish communities. Though Blackstone's influence on the modern-day Zionist movement is not currently well known, I believe he should be among the founding fathers and recognized for his early contributions to the Zionist cause. Today, we explore the life and influence of William Blackstone on the Tov Podcast.
You are listening to the Tov Podcast.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today on the Tov Podcast. Since 1887, Life in Messiah has been sharing God's heart for the Jewish people. You can learn more about the work that he's doing through our staff around the globe at lifeinmessiah.org. William Eugene Blackstone was born in Adams, New York on October 6th of 1841. Being that his father was a tintsmith, he grew up in humble circumstances. Though certainly not wealthy, a general confidence certainly flowed through his veins due to his family history. It's believed that one of his ancestors, also a reverend, was the first European settler of Boston. Blackstone's parents regularly took him to a Methodist church, and it was there that he first heard and received the gospel. This was about the age of 10. Blackstone describes that pivotal decision like this: I was deeply convicted of sin and can never forget that meeting in the little basement room of an old church where they all knelt in prayer for me. I can only remember in my own prayer that I asked God for Jesus' sake to forgive me my sins and bless his name. And he did it. The burden rolled away, the tears were gone, and I was filled with joy. Just 3 years after that, at the age of 13, Blackstone sensed God calling him into full-time ministry. And after another decade had gone by, when he was 23, he decided to volunteer for service with the Christian Commission, much like the Red Cross of today. Blackstone was privileged to serve at General Grant's headquarters and even converse with the general on several occasions. While volunteering, Blackstone was ordained by his pastor from Adams, New York in 1868. After finishing his volunteer service, Blackstone married and settled down not far from Chicago, in a little town called Rockford. He married a woman named Sarah. After 2 years, they left Rockford and moved closer to Chicago in a suburb called Oak Park. At that time, Blackstone was not working in full-time ministry. He was enjoying success by investing in buildings and properties. William and Sarah would end up having 3 children, one of whom tragically died at the age of 23. Now, despite Blackstone's success in the business world, he pursued his God-given calling in 1877. He gave himself over to the work of advancing the good news. He promised God that he would cease business dealings until he had tried to preach the gospel for at least 2 years. In the ensuing years, he renewed his commitment many times over. At this same time, the modern Zionist movement was at a crucial point. In the 1880s, the region known as Palestine was experiencing its first major wave of Russian Jewish immigrants. The pogroms, or state-sponsored riots, were taking a heavy toll on the Jewish populations in the Pale of Settlement. Not only did these Jewish refugees flee to what would be the future land of Israel, they also fled to cities in the U.S. like New York and Chicago. The idea of returning to the land of Israel to set up a homeland for Jewish refugees was becoming a reality for some in the Jewish community. Jewish people from Europe moved there and began to farm the land, purchase property. And a lot of this property was purchased from absentee landowners. These folks started schools, built roads, and embarked on a new journey that would lead them far away from oppressive governments. In the years 1888 and 1889, Blackstone traveled to Europe and to the Middle East to see all these realities for himself. He took his 12-year-old daughter, Flora, with him at the time. Thankfully, Blackstone kept a detailed journal of all their travels. We read in his journal that he met with many popular people on the journey, such as Charles Spurgeon, Hudson Taylor, Charles Warren, Prince Henry of Germany, and even the Guinness family. Yes, the same family that still makes beer today. Blackstone also visited popular religious sites such as John Wesley's home and St. Peter's Basilica. There's no doubt this trip had a great effect on his thinking and future actions. In 1908, Blackstone claimed that the Jewish population of Palestine was more than 80,000 people. These large migrations of Jewish people to the region of Palestine prompted Blackstone to provide economic support to such causes as the Lovers of Zion and colonization of Zion. The Lovers of Zion were essentially societies in Eastern Europe that had a conviction that a return to the land of Israel was really the only way, the only hope for Jewish people to survive in a world filled with so much anti-Semitism. Throughout this time, Blackstone was learning more about the Bible and the Middle East. At the same time, the early foundations were being laid for the modern-day Zionist movement. In his book, The Founding Fathers of Zionism, Ben-Zion Netanyahu reviews 5 men who devoted much of their lives to the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people. What's interesting is that each of these 5 men were alive and working toward a state at the same time as Blackstone. For example, Leo Pinsker, Theodore Herzl, Max Nordau, Israel Zangwill, and Zev Jabotinsky. The year 1897 proved to be a pivotal point in the Zionist cause, as the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland. This was under the leadership of Theodore Herzl. This event would be viewed by Blackstone as another move closer to the fulfillment of Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones, which, if you read Ezekiel chapter 37, you see very clearly that the dry bones coming together and breath being given to them is all about the nation of Israel. Now, because many Jewish refugees were leaving the Pale of Settlement and moving to Chicago, this provided Blackstone with great opportunities to befriend the Jewish people and to share the good news with them. Among other things, Blackstone started an organization called the Chicago Hebrew Mission, known by many today as Life in Messiah International. But another major accomplishment of Blackstone was becoming a popular speaker on the Bible conference circuit between 1896 and 1907. You see, in the latter half of the 19th century, Bible conferences were becoming very popular among believers who wanted to know more about God's future for Israel and the nations. It's likely, though not verifiable, that Blackstone was influenced by the teaching of John Nelson Darby, the great premillennial teacher who made 5 visits in total to Chicago. Though it's not known for sure that Blackstone and Darby met personally, it doesn't seem far-fetched to think they did. Teaching at various Bible conferences provided Blackstone the opportunity to influence the views of hundreds, perhaps thousands of Christians. Besides the establishment of Life in Messiah, Blackstone also wrote a book called Jesus is Coming. This little book influenced how future premillennialists would think about language, hermeneutics, and the relationship between Israel and the church, in addition to such topics as the rapture and the tribulation period. In his book, Blackstone urges readers to take a literal, premillennial view of the Scriptures, with teachings like the following quote from his book: "The millennial kingdom will be a literal reign of Messiah on the earth. and not simply a spiritual exaltation of the church. We're going to take a quick break on the Tove podcast. When we come back, we're going to dive into Blackstone and his relationship to the Jewish community on the Tove podcast.
Since 1887, Life in Messiah has helped Christians understand the Jewish roots of our faith and God's ongoing commitment to His people. We teach that anti-Semitism is inconsistent with biblical faith, and we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, which includes her spiritual renewal as well as physical safety. In all we do, our priority is to share the gospel message. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or at lifeinmessiah.org. That's lifeinmessiah.org.
Welcome back to the Tove podcast. We're taking an in-depth look today at the life and influence of William Blackstone, a forgotten figure to both the Jewish and Christian communities. Blackstone is not well known among today's Jewish community, whereas many streets and buildings in Israel bear the names of other early Zionists. Blackstone's memorial, which was a forest, has been lost. I have no knowledge of any streets or buildings in Israel that have been named after William Blackstone. This seems odd, given the reality that he was quite popular among the Jewish community of his time, and was a big encouragement to the cause of modern Zionism. Of note, however, is a short article on Blackstone that can be found in the Encyclopedia Judaica, a secular publication. Among other information, the article states that Blackstone was an ardent supporter of the return of the Jews to Palestine. The article also mentions the Blackstone Memorial, which we'll discuss a little bit later, and how that may have influenced President Woodrow Wilson's positive views of the Balfour Declaration. Despite Blackstone's fervent belief that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, he was widely accepted in the Zionist community. He had prominent contacts such as Louis Brandeis, Stephen Wise, and Nathan Strauss. There are records of these men sending greeting cards to one another. Even the great Baron de Rothschild of France knew Blackstone as a proponent of the Zionist movement. In 1893, Rothschild wrote to his friend in America, Adam Rosenberg, encouraging him to contact Blackstone for economic support for Rosenberg's organization, Hovevei Zion. So, as Blackstone was considered to be a seminal figure in the Zionist movement, Louis Brandeis and Nathan Strauss agreed that Blackstone was the father of modern-day Zionism. Why? Because Blackstone's work predated that of Herzl's Der Judenstaat by 5 years, and it predated the First Zionist Congress by 6 years. On March 5th of 1891, Blackstone wrote a petition that would later be called the Blackstone Memorial. This memorial was a petition to President Benjamin Harrison and James Blake, the Secretary of State at the time. In the petition, Blackstone asks, and I'm quoting here, "What shall be done for the Russian Jews?" He then encourages President Harrison and Secretary Blake to give Palestine to the Jewish people for their permanent homeland. He continues, "It is an appropriate time for all nations, and especially the Christian nations of Europe, to show kindness to Israel." This petition was not just a random letter sent by a Christian to a president. In reality, it carried a lot of political weight because of who Blackstone recruited to sign the petition. Though not a full list by any means, here are just a few of the prominent names and positions that can be found as signatories on the Blackstone Memorial. Melville Fuller, Chief Justice of the United States. Charles Blanchard, President of Wheaton College. J. Pierpont Morgan, founder of J.P. Morgan. Edwin Fittler, the mayor of Philadelphia. And Frank Hatton of the Washington Post. The 416 signatories included congressmen, clergy, rabbis, and city officials. The different cities represented on the Blackstone Memorial were diverse and included Chicago, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York City. 12 years after that petition was submitted, in 1903, Blackstone sent another addition to the memorial to President Roosevelt. At that time, the Jews of Russia were experiencing great persecution, and it's likely that it was those events that prompted Blackstone to send another addition. The memorial was received, but didn't get near the attention of the first memorial. 13 years later, in 1916, in coordination with the Zionist Movement of America, Blackstone sent another petition, this time to President Woodrow Wilson. The timing of this letter was important because it precedes the Balfour Declaration by just 1 year. It is possible that this petition influenced Wilson's views of the Balfour Declaration. Blackstone was known for working with a variety of Jewish people, both those who accepted the gospel as well as those who didn't. This separated him from many other believers at the time who only worked with Jewish believers. This unique character trait made him a true believer in the restoration of Israel, not just someone trying to manipulate Bible prophecy for other means. In conclusion, we've briefly reviewed the life and influence of William E. Blackstone. It's my opinion that more could and should be published concerning his influence on both the Christian and Jewish communities with the ongoing work of Life in Messiah. Blackstone's influence has now spanned more than 150 years. As we said earlier, one of the primary ways in which he's influenced the Christian community is through his book, Jesus is Coming. This book has been translated into 42 languages, including Hebrew and Yiddish. Blackstone, through his writing and teaching, has influenced thousands, if not millions of believers with regard to their eschatology and love for the Jewish people. For that, he should be commemorated. How many believers have read Blackstone's work or heard his preaching and then produced fruit for the kingdom that will never be known on this side of heaven? Perhaps someday we'll know the full extent to which Blackstone has impacted this world. The main ways in which Blackstone influenced the Jewish community are somewhat known, but like the Christian community, may never fully be realized. Blackstone certainly encouraged the early Zionist leaders and even provided economic support toward the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. He was not ashamed of his belief in Yeshua and the Bible as God's authoritative word. One wonders whether certain Jewish men such as Nathan Strauss and Louis Brandeis would have ever heard the gospel were it not for their close relationship with Blackstone. But perhaps Blackstone's greatest influence on both communities is through the organization he founded over 130 years ago. Through Life in Messiah International, thousands of Jewish people have heard the gospel. Thousands of Jewish people have been edified. Anti-Semitism has been confronted and condemned at various times throughout the years. If Blackstone could see what's been accomplished today by the organization that he founded so long ago, I don't think he'd care about a forgotten forest or a little name recognition. However, I still believe it would benefit both communities to be more familiar with the legacy of William E. Blackstone. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Tov Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the work that God is doing through our staff around the world, I encourage you to head on over to lifeinmessiah.org. There you can sign up for our updates as well as view hundreds of other podcasts that we've added to our collection. Until next time, shalom.